The air in Blackwood Falls, Massachusetts, was thick with the promise of autumn, a crisp bite that carried the scent of wet leaves and the faint coppery tang of the nearby river. The year was 1872, and the town, a quiet industrial hamlet built on the backbone of textile mills and lumber yards, was holding its breath. Today was the day. The grand opening of the Blackwood Falls Pleasure Gardens. For weeks, posters had plastered every lamppost and storefront. Etched in elaborate curling script was the park's promise, a spectacle of modern leisure, a haven from the toil of daily life. The centerpiece, a grand carousel, was a marvel of engineering, its hand-carved horses and gilded chariots catching the weak morning sun. Children tugged at their parents' hands, their eyes wide with unbridled excitement. Adults, too, found a rare glimmer of hope in the spectacle, a distraction from the relentless march of the Industrial Revolution. Elias Thorne, a man of 52 years with a face etched by hard work and a quiet sorrow, stood at the entrance, a worn leather journal clutched in his hand. He was the town's chief architect and engineer, a man of reason and meticulous detail. He had supervised the park's construction from the ground up, ensuring every beam, every gear, every spoke was perfect. He had designed the grand Italianate-style main building, its wide windows and symmetrical facade, a testament to his belief in order and beauty. Yet an unease had settled in his gut weeks ago, a feeling he couldn't place. The first hint of this disquiet had come from his youngest apprentice, a bright-eyed boy named Leo. Leo had been working on the Carousel's complex gear system. He'd approached Elias with a trembling hand, his face pale. "Mr. Thorne," he'd whispered. "The sound. I don't know how to describe it. It's not right." Elias had dismissed it as the sound of new machinery settling, the groans of metal finding its rhythm. But Leo's words lingered. The crowd surged forward as the gates opened, a river of bonnets and top hats, of eager children and weary but hopeful parents. The air filled with the buzz of conversation and the light laughter of a town ready to embrace joy. Elias watched as the first families boarded the carousel, their faces alight with anticipation. The operator, a man named Silas, a jovial figure with a thick mustache and a twinkle in his eye, pulled the lever. The gears groaned to life. The massive platform began to rotate, and the horses rose and fell on their polished brass poles. The initial silence was broken, not by the cheerful melody of a calliope, but by a sound so alien and horrifying that a collective gasp went through the crowd. It was a cacophony of distorted noise, a strange garbled whine that seemed to twist and contort. It was a sound that made the hairs on Elias's arms stand on end, a sound that felt less like music and more like a chorus of low, sustained moans. Silas, his smile frozen, fiddled with the controls, his face turning a shade of sickly green. The sound intensified, a series of elongated, mournful wails that seemed to emanate not from the machine itself, but from deep within the wood and steel. A young boy on a painted white horse began to cry, his small wails joining the chorus. Others followed, their laughter turning to tears of fear and confusion. The faces of the adults, just moments before so full of joy, now held a mirror of Elias's own growing dread. He pushed through the panicking crowd, his heart pounding in his chest. "Silas, stop it!" he yelled over the rising clamor. Silas, in a state of panic, pulled the main switch, and the carousel shuddered to a halt. The unholy wails died away, replaced by the panicked whimpers of children and the hushed, terrified murmurs of the townsfolk. A few people scrambled off the ride, their faces ashen, clutching their children tightly. Elias and Silas were left alone on the platform, surrounded by the silent, painted horses. Silas ran a hand through his hair, his eyes wide. "I don't understand, Elias. I checked the organ myself. It should be playing, Oh, Susanna. I swear on my mother's grave." Elias knelt, placing his ear against the wooden floorboards of the platform. He heard a low, almost imperceptible vibration, a hum that felt wrong. He looked up at Silas, his mind racing, trying to find a logical explanation. A mechanical failure, a faulty pipe. But the sound hadn't been a malfunction. It had been a deliberate, albeit distorted sound. It had felt sentient. The disappointment in the air was palpable. People began to leave, their joyful anticipation shattered. Elias knew he had to find the source. This wasn't a simple mechanical issue, it was a mystery, a sickness at the heart of his creation. This was his project, his reputation, and his life's work on the line. He would not rest until he found a rational explanation for the sound that had haunted the air. He looked at the silent carousel, at the frozen horses with their painted, unblinking eyes. He felt a shiver run down his spine, a sense of foreboding that went beyond the embarrassment of the failed opening. The sounds were gone now, but he could still hear them in his mind, a lingering echo of sorrow and despair. Elias had built this park for the town, a place of happiness. But something dark had taken hold, and he feared this was only the beginning. He knew he was the only one who could get to the bottom of this. This was no ordinary case of a broken machine. This was a puzzle with human stakes, and it was his to solve. He took a deep breath, the cold autumn air filling his lungs. His gaze swept over the park, its empty paths and silent attractions now holding an ominous quiet. The sun had disappeared behind a thick blanket of grey clouds, and the cheerful promise of the morning had been replaced by a chilling premonition. The carousel, his masterpiece, had played a melody of misery. He had to understand why. If you enjoyed this first chapter and want to see how this chilling mystery unfolds, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single part of this story. Elias Thorne spent the rest of the day in a state of grim determination. He dismissed the remaining park staff and closed the gates, a move that only deepened the town's disappointment. The silence of the park was unnerving, a stark contrast to the lively bustle he had envisioned. His first order of business was to isolate the carousel. He secured the area with a simple rope, a meager attempt at keeping the curious at bay, but effective enough. The real work began with a series of meticulous inspections. He started with the carousel's organ, the mechanical heart of the ride. He opened the ornate wooden casing, revealing a labyrinth of pipes, bellows and levers. He ran his fingers along the brass pipes, checking for any cracks or blockages. Everything was in place, exactly as he and his team had installed it. The bellows were intact, and the pinewood cylinders, etched with the notes for "Oh, Susanna," were pristine. The silence of the organ was a new kind of terror. It was a perfect machine that had produced an imperfect, monstrous sound. He found no evidence of tampering or mechanical failure. The mystery only deepened. Next, he turned his attention to the structure itself. He used a carpenter's level, a plumb line, and his own keen eye to check the stability of the platform and the integrity of the support beams. He meticulously inspected each of the hand-carved horses, feeling the grain of the wood under his calloused fingertips. He noticed something he hadn't before. Each horse had been carved from a different type of wood, a detail the sculptor, a master craftsman named Henry Alcott, had been particularly proud of. A menagerie of wood for a menagerie of animals, Henry had said. The diversity of the wood, oak, cherry, maple, and even a dark, almost black mahogany, was meant to add a touch of unique artistry. Now, in the chilling silence, Elias felt a strange, unsettling quality to it. He went to the workshop where the horses had been carved, a dusty, sawdust-filled building on the outskirts of town. He found Henry, a man as taciturn as he was skilled, packing away his tools. Henry's face was pale, his hands trembling as he secured a final chisel. "Henry," the sound from the carousel, the horses. Elias began. "Did you notice anything unusual about the wood you were using?" Henry looked at him, his eyes distant. "The wood?" "No, sir. It was all good stock. I bought it from the lumber yard up north, Same place as always. But the carvings, they were difficult. It was as if the wood resisted the chisel, a strange kind of grain. It didn't feel like wood at all. "What do you mean?" Elias asked, his heart thumping. "I can't explain it. It's not a thing for a man of science like yourself. It's just a feeling, a coldness, like something was in the wood already." Henry shook his head, a look of profound discomfort on his face. "When I was carving the one with the black wood, the mahogany, I swore I heard a faint ringing, like a distant cry. But I dismissed it as the sound of the chisel on the wood. I thought I was tired." Elias's mind reeled. He knew Henry was a man of logic and practicality. For him to speak of feelings and distant cries was a sign of genuine distress. The mahogany horse. Elias remembered its unnervingly realistic eyes, a detail Henry had labored over. He had to inspect it again more closely. He returned to the park as dusk settled, casting long, eerie shadows across the deserted grounds. The carousel stood like a monument to a failed dream, its painted animals now looking less joyful and more like petrified screams. He went directly to the mahogany horse, its dark wood absorbing the last vestiges of light. He ran his hand over its polished surface, and a coldness, a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air, seeped into his bones. He pressed his ear to the horse's flank, listening intently. At first there was only silence, then a low, almost imperceptible hum. It wasn't the sound of machinery. It was something else. A thin, high-pitched whine that seemed to come from within the wood itself. He stood up, his mind struggling to reconcile the impossible. Wood doesn't hum. It doesn't cry. He looked at the other horses, the ones of cherry and oak, and put his ear to them. Nothing. The sound was isolated to the mahogany horse. He noticed the horse's eye. Henry had carved it with such meticulous detail, a swirling, almost hypnotic pattern in the wood grain. It was unsettlingly lifelike. Elias found a small, almost invisible imperfection in the wood, a slight discoloration near the eye. He took a small pick from his pocket, a tool he used for intricate measurements, and carefully, he scraped at the tiny spot. The sound that followed was not a scream, but a sudden, sharp intake of breath. The air grew colder, and Elias felt a sudden, profound sense of sorrow, a wave of despair so strong it brought him to his knees. The mahogany horse was a vessel for something, a repository for a human emotion so powerful and so raw that it had been somehow imprinted upon the wood itself. The wailing from the carousel had been a chorus of suffering, not from the machine, but from the wood that held these trapped emotions. He looked around, a profound sense of dread settling over him. What had he built? Was it a park of joy, or a monument to a forgotten misery? The grand opening had been a failure, but he now realized it was much more than that. It was a prelude, a dark, chilling whisper from the past, a sound he was compelled to understand. He was the architect. The responsibility was his alone. He had to uncover the source of this mahogany and the secret it held. The carousel was a crime scene, and he was the only one who could truly investigate. He was a man of reason, but he was facing something that defied all logic. He knew the townsfolk would dismiss it as a mechanical failure, but he knew better. This was a human story, a tragedy etched in wood, and he was only at the beginning of its terrifying tale. Elias Thorne's pursuit of a rational explanation led him on a new and increasingly unsettling path. He needed to find the source of the mahogany wood, the dark heart of the carousel's bizarre affliction. He returned to his office, a sanctuary of organized chaos filled with blueprints, ledgers, and architectural drawings. He spent the next day poring over his records, specifically the procurement logs for the Blackwood Falls Pleasure Gardens. The records for the lumber were meticulously kept. The supplier's name was etched in his own spidery handwriting, the Alcott Timber and Mill Co. He knew the Alcott family. They were a long-standing fixture in the town, a quiet, industrious clan who had provided wood for nearly every building in Blackwood Falls. The mill was located on the outskirts of town, nestled by the river, a place Elias had passed countless times without a second thought. The next morning, armed with his journal and a gnawing sense of urgency, Elias made his way to the mill. The air was thick with the scent of sawdust and fresh-cut pine. The mill was a hub of activity, with men in overalls loading massive logs onto horse-drawn carts. He found the mill's owner, a burly, gray-haired man named Thomas Alcott, Henry's brother, poring over a stack of invoices. Elias explained his purpose, omitting the more disturbing details of the carousel's sound. He simply stated he needed to trace the source of the mahogany used for the project. Thomas Alcott, a man of few words, led him to a dusty office in the back, cluttered with ledgers and stacks of order forms. He pulled out a massive leather-bound volume and flipped through the pages with a practiced hand. Mahogany? Yes, here it is, Thomas said, his finger tracing a line item. An unusual request. We don't deal in much of it. It's hard to come by. This was a special order, a whole lot of it. He squinted at the entry. Came from the old Oakhaven property. We had a crew out there clearing the lot for the new rail line last spring. Found a stand of old-growth trees, dark as night. Had a strange grain to it. Henry was real excited about it for your project. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Oakhaven. The name resonated with a dark history. It was the site of the old Blackwood Falls Asylum, a place of whispered rumors and forgotten tragedies. It had been abandoned for 20 years, its decaying buildings standing as silent testaments to a past the town tried to forget. Elias had always believed the rumors were just that, rumors, a place of human suffering and despair. Now, the very wood from that place was singing a song of agony in his carousel. Thomas, Elias said, his voice low, can you tell me more about that property, the Oakhaven Asylum? Thomas looked up, a shadow of discomfort crossing his face. There's not much to tell. It was a terrible place, closed down after the fire back in '52. A lot of patients died, a lot of sadness. The town just wanted to bury the memory of it. He hesitated, his gaze dropping back to the ledger. There were stories, of course. People said the patients' cries echoed in the halls even after they were gone. But that's just talk. Elias knew it wasn't just talk. The cries he had heard were the very cries Thomas described. He had to go to the Oakhaven property. He had to understand the history of that land and the misery that had been embedded into the very fibers of the wood. The rational part of his mind screamed for a logical explanation, but the chilling reality he faced pushed him closer to an unpalatable conclusion. The wood had absorbed the suffering of the asylum's former inhabitants. He left the mill and began his journey to the Oakhaven property. The walk was long, and the landscape became more desolate the closer he got. The road, once well-traveled, was now overgrown and muddy. As he approached, a thick fog rolled in, blanketing the forest in a gray, spectral haze. The old asylum stood on a hill overlooking the town, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring down at the world that had forgotten it. The buildings were a skeleton of their former selves, with rotting wood and crumbling brick. He walked to the area where Thomas had said the trees were felled. The ground was still scarred from the logging, and a few jagged stumps remained. He knelt and ran his hand over the rough surface of a stump, the same dark mahogany as the carousel horse. He felt the cold, the same cold he had felt from the horse itself, a profound and lingering chill. Suddenly a sound, so faint it was almost a trick of the mind, broke the silence. It was the same high-pitched whine he had heard from the mahogany horse, but it was coming from the ground, from the very roots of the tree. It was the sound of a deep and suffocating sorrow. Elias stood up, his mind reeling. He was not just tracing wood. He was tracing a living history of pain. The rationalist in him was fighting a losing battle. He had to find out what had happened at the asylum. He had to find the human story behind the wails. He had to understand what kind of suffering could be so profound as to be absorbed by a tree and then replayed in a carousel. The carousel was a symptom, a consequence. The asylum was the cause, and he had to go inside. The grand, decorative iron gates of the asylum, once a symbol of institutional control, were now rusted and hanging on their hinges. They creaked in the wind like a sigh. Elias pushed them open and stepped onto the grounds, feeling a profound sense of responsibility and fear. He had to know what happened here. And the wood. It was talking to him. The air inside the Oakhaven Asylum was cold and heavy with the scent of decay. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that filtered through the broken windows. Elias, with a lantern in hand, navigated the labyrinthine corridors, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. The peeling wallpaper, once a cheerful pattern, was now a grotesque tapestry of mold and water stains. He felt a profound sense of dread, not from fear of the unknown, but from the palpable weight of the human suffering that had once filled these rooms. He made his way to what appeared to be the administrative office, a room with a large, overturned desk and a set of shelves lined with moldy, decaying files. He searched for anything that could shed light on the fire and the patients. After an hour of sifting through crumbling paper, he found it. Tucked away in a forgotten drawer, a leather-bound journal, its cover worn and its pages brittle. The title was etched on the front in a shaky hand. Patient Logbook, Ward 7. He opened the book, his hands trembling. The pages were filled with names, dates, and brief clinical descriptions. He skimmed through, his mind searching for a specific detail, something that would connect this place to the wood. Then his eyes fell upon an entry, dated just a few months before the fire. The handwriting was different, more frantic, less formal. Patient 47, Ilara Vance, admitted with severe melancholia, found crying in the woods clutching a small box, refuses to speak, spends hours staring at the trees outside her window, claims they listen to her. The entry was followed by a more recent one in a different hand. Patient 47. Melancholia has worsened, seems to be in a state of perpetual sorrow, cries for hours without ceasing. The sound is unnerving. It echoes through the ward. Dr. Thorne has requested she be moved to a private room. He believes her cries are infecting the other patients. Elias's blood ran cold. The entry mentioned a Dr. Thorne. He realized with a jolt that the logbook was written by his own great-uncle, a man he had heard little about. His family rarely spoke of him, only that he had disappeared after the asylum fire. He had been a man of science, a respected physician. Elias now knew why the name resonated with him. It was a ghost from his own past, a family secret he was now uncovering. He flipped to the last page, a final, desperate entry, also in his great-uncle's hand. The cries. They won't stop. They are a physical presence. I believe Ilara is not simply crying. She is giving her sorrow to the trees. The patient logbook is filled with their anguish. It's a record of their suffering. I must get this out. The building is falling apart. The fire, it's spreading. The final words were a frantic scrawl. The mahogany trees, they listened. They remember. The sorrow is in the wood. It is a living record of their pain. The last page ended abruptly, as if his great-uncle had been interrupted. Elias's mind raced. His great-uncle, a man of science, had witnessed the impossible. He had seen the wood absorbing the cries, the sorrow of the patients, a phenomenon he could not explain. And he had tried to save the evidence, the logbook, to warn someone. But the fire had consumed the asylum, and his great-uncle had disappeared, presumably in the blaze. He now had his answer, or at least a horrifying hypothesis. The mahogany trees had grown in the shadow of Oakhaven, their roots drinking from the same earth as the patient's despair. Ilara Vance, A woman of profound sorrow had seemingly transferred her grief into the wood. His great-uncle had witnessed it, had tried to document it, and had paid the ultimate price. The lumber company had unknowingly cut down those very trees, and he, Elias, had unknowingly used them to build a monument of misery. The carousel was a twisted testament to a forgotten tragedy. The sound wasn't a mechanical malfunction. It was the echo of a forgotten woman's sorrow, a chorus of despair from the patients who had died in the fire, their last moments of terror and pain absorbed into the very wood that now spun in circles for the amusement of a new generation. He had to get out of the asylum. He had the logbook, the crucial piece of evidence. He needed to find out what had happened to Elara Vance. Had she survived the fire? Did she escape? He had to find the truth, not just for the sake of his carousel, but for the sake of the town, which had unknowingly built its new pleasure garden on a foundation of pain. As he turned to leave, a floorboard creaked behind him. He spun around, his lantern light sweeping across the empty room. There was nothing there, but he felt a presence, a cold, mournful sensation that wrapped around him like a shroud. He clutched the journal to his chest and ran, the echoes of his great-uncle's words and the mournful wails of a lost patient ringing in his ears. He was no longer just an architect. He was an investigator, a man uncovering a human tragedy etched in wood, and he was the only one who knew the truth. The journey back to Blackwood Falls was a blur for Elias. He arrived at his home, a small, meticulously organized cottage on the edge of town, and immediately went to his study. He laid the journal out on his desk, its brittle pages a testament to a long-buried secret. The logbook was not just a record, it was a living document, a repository of a hidden history. He knew he had to find a person connected to the Oak Haven Asylum, someone who could confirm the story and fill in the missing gaps. His mind immediately went to the town's oldest resident, an elderly woman named Martha Gable. She had been a young nurse at the hospital, an unassuming woman who had a quiet, kind demeanor. She lived alone in a small house near the river, and Elias knew she had a long memory. He had to be careful, however. He couldn't just tell her about the wailing carousel or the sentient wood. He had to approach her with caution, building trust and leading her to the truth. The next morning, under a sky still bruised with gray clouds, Elias walked to Martha's house. The air was heavy with the promise of rain. He found her in her garden, her gnarled hands tending to a patch of vibrant red roses. She looked up, her eyes, though faded with age, still sharp. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice a soft, dry whisper. "I heard about the park. A great shame. I'm sure you'll fix it." "I hope so, Martha," he replied, a vague politeness hiding his true purpose. "I'm doing a bit of research for the next phase of the project, a history of the town's buildings. I was wondering if you could tell me about your time at the Oak Haven Asylum." Martha's face tightened, a flicker of pain crossing her features. "That was a long time ago, a dark time. We don't talk about it much." "I understand," Elias said gently. "But I found some old records, and I've come across a few names. A patient, Elara Vance. Do you remember her?" Martha's composure broke. She sat down on a stone bench, her shoulders sagging. "Elara," she whispered, the name heavy with sorrow. "Of course I remember Elara. She was the one. The cause of it all," they said. Elias sat beside her, his heart pounding. "What do you mean, the cause?" "She was so sad," Martha began, her voice gaining strength as the memories surfaced. "Not just melancholy. It was a sickness of the soul. She had lost her husband and her child in a terrible accident. She came to us, and she just grieved. For months. A profound and terrible grief. She would cry, but it wasn't just tears. It was a sound. A sound that made your own heart ache." "Did she ever talk about the trees?" Elias asked, thinking of the logbook entry. Martha's eyes widened. "She did. She would stand at the window for hours staring out at the stand of mahogany trees. She said they were her listeners. She said they would take her pain. She believed they were her friends. The doctors, they thought it was just a delusion. But I knew it wasn't. I could feel it myself. The air around her was heavy with sorrow. It would seep into everything, the walls, the floors, the trees outside, and the fire. Elias pressed, his voice barely a whisper. The fire, Martha said, her voice trembling. It was a cold night. I was on duty in a different ward. I heard the screams. The men from the town came to help, but it was too late. The fire started in Ward 7. They said it was a gas lamp that fell. But I saw something else. I saw a figure, a woman standing outside, looking at the fire. It was Elara. Elias leaned in. She survived. She did, Martha confirmed. She ran into the woods. She was clutching that little wooden box she always carried, the one she came with. She was never seen again. Some said she was a ghost. Some said she ran away to the city. I've always believed she was looking for a new place for her sorrow. Elias felt a new wave of horror. Elara Vance was alive, and her suffering, in some twisted way, was connected to the wood, to his carousel, and to his family. The logbook had spoken of his great-uncle Dr. Thorne. He had to ask, "Martha, my great-uncle Dr. Thorne, do you know what happened to him?" Martha's eyes filled with tears. Poor Dr. Thorne. He was a good man. He was the one who saw it. He saw the sorrow in the trees. He tried to tell everyone. He said the building was sick. He was trying to get the patients out, but he was trapped in the fire. His body was never found. They said he was consumed by the flames, but I've always thought he was taken. The place, it had a sickness, a deep, abiding sadness, and it took anyone who got too close to it. Elias sat in stunned silence. The truth was far more complex and terrifying than he had imagined. His great-uncle had not been a victim of a simple fire. He had been consumed by a malevolent force, a profound human sorrow that had manifested itself in the world. He was a cautionary tale, a ghost of a man who had gotten too close to the truth. He thanked Martha and walked away, the weight of the new information pressing down on him. The carousel was not just a symbol of a forgotten tragedy. It was a beacon, a siren call for a sorrowful woman, Elara Vance. She was still out there somewhere, a vessel of grief, and now her sorrow was playing on his creation. He had to find her. He had to confront the source of the misery, the woman who had cried her pain into the heart of the wood. The rational part of his mind told him it was impossible, but he had already seen enough to know that some human emotions were so powerful they could defy all logic. Elias Thorne felt a profound and chilling shift in his understanding of the world. He was no longer just an architect dealing with a technical problem. He was a man chasing a ghost, a living, breathing ghost named Elara Vance. The town, in its ignorance, had buried its past, but he was now forced to excavate it, to face a truth that was both terrifying and deeply human. He knew his first step had to be a search for Elara. But where do you begin to look for a woman who disappeared 20 years ago? He started with the most logical place, the local newspaper archives. He spent the next few days in the dusty, quiet back room of the Blackwood Falls Herald office, meticulously poring over old editions. He found several articles about the Oakhaven Asylum fire, all of them brief and lacking in detail, a clear sign of a town eager to move on. The articles confirmed the official story. A gas lamp, a tragic accident, a swift and complete investigation. The list of the dead was short, and Elara Vance's name was notably absent. The papers made no mention of her survival, only that she was unaccounted for. It was a deliberate omission, a way to avoid the uncomfortable truth. He found another small, obscure article buried in the back pages a few weeks after the fire. It was a report about a strange incident in a neighboring town, a place called Willow Creek. A woman, a transient with no name, had been arrested for vagrancy. She had been found crying uncontrollably in a public park, her screams so mournful that they had caused a stampede. The article noted that the woman was holding a small wooden box and that she was taken to the local mental institution, where she remained uncooperative and mute. The article ended there. Elias's heart pounded. This had to be Ilara Vance. The description, the wooden box, the profound and disruptive sorrow. It was too specific to be a coincidence. He had a location, a lead, a direction. He had to go to Willow Creek. He packed a small bag, his worn leather journal and his great-uncle's logbook tucked safely inside. He told his staff he was taking a trip to Boston for business, a lie that felt bitter on his tongue. He took the train west, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the tracks, a steady counterpoint to his racing mind. The landscape blurred outside the window, the familiar fields and forests replaced by a new and unknown terrain. He was leaving the world he understood, the world of blueprints and measurements, and entering a realm of human sorrow and inexplicable phenomena. He arrived in Willow Creek, a town much like Blackwood Falls, built on a foundation of industry and hard work. He made his way to the town's small courthouse, a grand building of brick and stone. He found the town clerk, a portly man with a kind but tired face. Elias introduced himself and asked to see the arrest records from 20 years ago. The clerk, intrigued by the unusual request, led him to a back room filled with dusty, bound volumes. It took him hours to find it. The records were sparse, but the entry for the unnamed woman confirmed the newspaper report. She was committed to the Willow Creek Sanitarium, a mental institution on the outskirts of town. The record included a note from the admitting physician. Patient exhibits extreme melancholia and a unique vocal tic, a long sustained moan that seems to infect the atmosphere. Possessions include one small, intricate wooden box. Elias had found his ghost. He had found Ilara Vance. But the sanitarium, that was another unknown. He knew that institutions of that era were often less about healing and more about containment. He had a profound sense of fear for what he would find. What had 20 years of institutionalization done to a woman who could cry her sorrow into the very fabric of the world? He made his way to the Willow Creek Sanitarium, a stark, imposing building of gray stone that stood on a windswept hill. The grounds were manicured, but the building itself had a cold, desolate quality. He was met at the front desk by a stern-faced matron who listened to his story with a look of barely concealed skepticism. "There's no one here by that name, sir," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "We have no record of an Ilara Vance." Elias felt a wave of frustration. What about a John Doe? An unnamed woman committed 20 years ago? The matron's face remained impassive. "Sir, our records are private. We cannot give you that information." Elias knew he was at a dead end. He had to find another way. He walked back out onto the grounds, his mind reeling. He had come all this way, and he was being met with a wall of bureaucracy and silence. He sat on a bench, defeated, looking at the manicured flower beds, and he noticed a small, elderly woman tending to a patch of weeds. Her back was to him, and her shoulders were slumped in a posture of profound weariness. She was humming a low, mournful tune. It wasn't a song, it was a long, sustained moan. Elias froze. He had heard that sound before, the same sound from the Carousel, the sound of sorrow made flesh. He watched as the woman reached down and picked a weed, and as she did, a tear rolled down her cheek, and she let out a small, almost imperceptible sigh. He felt a profound chill, a sense of grief that was not his own, but a lingering echo of a woman who had given her sorrow to the world. He stood up, his heart pounding. He had found her. Ilara Vance was not just a name in a logbook. She was a real, living, breathing person. And she was right here, her sadness still a physical force. He knew he had to talk to her. He had to understand. He had to find a way to stop her grief from spreading, from infecting the wood, from turning his creation into a monument of despair. He had to find out what was in that box, the source of her sorrow. And he had to do it before the sadness consumed him too. The elderly woman, her back still to Elias, continued to hum her mournful tune. He took a deep, steadying breath and approached her slowly, his footsteps silent on the grass. He knew he had to be careful. He wasn't a doctor or a man of science anymore. He was a person face to face with a profound human tragedy, a living, breathing testament to a life consumed by grief. He stopped a few feet away. "Elara?" he asked, his voice soft, almost a whisper. The woman froze. Her humming stopped. She turned, her face a web of wrinkles and sorrow. Her eyes, faded and distant, widened as she looked at him, a flicker of recognition in their depths. She said nothing, her mouth a tight line of resignation. "My name is Elias Thorne," he continued. "I'm the great-nephew of Dr. Thorne from the Oakhaven Asylum." At the mention of his great-uncle's name, a single tear rolled down her cheek. Her lips trembled. He tried to help me," she said, her voice a dry rasp, the sound of a voice that hadn't been used in decades. He told me the trees were listening." Elias felt a wave of relief mixed with a profound sense of sadness. He had found her. He knelt on the ground so he could be at eye level with her. "He wanted to help you. He knew. He wrote it down in his journal. I have it with me." He carefully pulled the logbook from his bag. Ilara's eyes fell upon the journal, and a gasp escaped her lips. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers tracing the faded leather cover. He saved it." She began to cry, but these weren't the long, sustained wails of the carousel. They were silent, painful tears, a release of decades of bottled-up grief. Elias took a moment, letting her have her moment of catharsis. He then asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "The box, Ilara, the one you came with. What was in it?" Ilara's eyes, now full of a profound sadness, looked at him. My child," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion, "and my husband." Elias was confused. "I don't understand." "When the train crashed," she explained, her words a painful confession, "it took them both. My husband had just finished carving a small wooden carousel for our child's birthday, a little music box. He was so proud of it. He was a master woodworker. It was the last thing he ever made." She looked at the ground, tears streaming down her face. The box. It held the pieces. A broken carousel, a broken family. Elias felt a cold, hard knot of dread tighten in his stomach. The truth was far more twisted than he had ever imagined. The source of her sorrow wasn't just her grief, it was the carousel itself, the one her husband had made, the one that was a symbol of their broken family. She had carried the pieces of that broken carousel, and the sorrow had infected her, had become a physical, manifest force. The mahogany trees had become a new vessel for her grief, and now his carousel, a perfect and beautiful machine, had become a new stage for her pain. "I tried to put the pieces back together," she continued, her voice gaining a desperate intensity. "But I couldn't fix it. The sadness, it was too heavy. It went into the wood, the trees. They took it. They took my broken heart, and now they're playing it back. They're playing the song of my sorrow." She looked at him, her eyes pleading. "It was never the asylum. It was the wood, the trees. They took my pain, and they gave it back to you. I'm sorry." Ilara's confession was a devastating blow. The entire time Elias had been chasing a mechanical failure, then a human tragedy. But the core of the problem was a profound and deeply personal grief. Ilara's pain was not just an emotion, it was a contagion, A sickness that could be transferred through touch, through proximity, through a wooden object. His carousel was a vessel for her pain, a physical monument to a family's shattered dreams. "What can I do?" Elias asked, his voice filled with a desperate hope. "How do I stop it?" Alara shook her head, her face a mask of profound defeat. "You can't. It's in the wood. It's in the memory. You have to break the memory." She looked at the logbook in his hand. "Dr. Thorne, he told me the only way to stop it was to break the memory, to destroy the thing that holds the sorrow, the carousel. It has to be destroyed." Elias was stunned. The one thing he had so meticulously built, his masterpiece, had to be torn down. It was a brutal and painful truth, but it was also the only logical solution. The carousel was a magnet for sorrow, a physical manifestation of a woman's grief. To save his town from the sickness of sorrow, he had to destroy his own creation. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn of the sanitarium. Elias looked at the broken woman in front of him, the keeper of sorrows, and he knew what he had to do. He had to go back to Blackwood Falls, and he had to dismantle the carousel piece by piece, and he had to put the pieces of her broken family to rest. He had to destroy his own legacy to save the town he had so diligently built. It was a painful irony, but it was the only way. The human cost of his beautiful creation was far too high. I hope you're enjoying the story so far. The truth is finally out in the open, but to find out if Elias will be able to follow through with the painful choice he has to make, you'll have to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the final chapters of this disturbing tale. Elias Thorne returned to Blackwood Falls with a heavy heart and a clear, albeit agonizing purpose. The truth, a painful and complex tapestry of grief and consequence, was now his to bear. He knew he couldn't simply tell the town the truth about Elara Vance and the sentient wood. They would never believe him. They would call him insane, a man broken by the failure of his grand project. He had to act. He had to dismantle the carousel and do it in a way that would not expose the full, horrifying reality. He began by calling a meeting with the town council, a group of stoic, no-nonsense men who saw the world in terms of profit and loss. He presented them with a fabricated story, a tale of a profound and ultimately unfixable mechanical flaw in the carousel's design. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice firm and professional, "the carousel is a failure. The main gear system is flawed. The wood, a special batch I imported, is too brittle for the constant rotation. It's creating a resonant vibration that is causing the strange sounds. It's a fundamental flaw in the design. It's a complete loss." The men of the council, though disappointed, were not surprised. Mechanical failures were a fact of life in their industrial town. They grumbled about the cost, the lost revenue, and the embarrassment of the failed opening. But they believed him. Elias, the man of reason, the meticulous architect, had made a mistake. It was a palatable explanation, one that a man of his stature could admit without losing face. "So, what do you propose?" asked Mr. Abernathy, a man whose fortune was tied to the lumber mill. "I propose we dismantle the carousel," Elias said, his voice as steady as he could make it. "Every piece. It is a danger to the public. It cannot be salvaged. I will oversee the process myself at no cost to the town." The council, satisfied with his explanation and the offer of free labor, agreed. They scheduled the dismantling for the following week, allowing Elias a few days to prepare. He knew this was the most important part of his plan. He had to find a way to honor the sorrow he was about to destroy. He had to find a way to put Elara's family to rest. He spent the next few days in a profound state of melancholy. He went back to the workshop and found the discarded, broken pieces of wood from the carousel's construction. He carefully selected a small, rectangular piece of mahogany, the dark heart of the problem. He knew this wood had been part of a living thing, a tree that had absorbed a human's grief. He couldn't just throw it away. He also found the discarded pieces of the organ's music cylinder, the one that was supposed to play "Oh, Susanna." He ran his fingers over the meticulously carved grooves, a ghost of a tune that had been silenced by a chorus of pain. He knew the true song of the carousel was not a happy one, but a song of sorrow. The day of the dismantling arrived under a gloomy gray sky. The town watched from a distance as Elias and a small crew of hired hands began the painful process of deconstructing his masterpiece. The horses, once so grand and majestic, were unbolted and lowered to the ground, their painted eyes now holding a sad, blank stare. The calliope organ was taken apart, its pipes and bellows silenced forever. The main platform, the source of the terrible sound, was lifted and placed on a large flatbed cart. Elias oversaw the removal of the mahogany horse, the one that had held the core of Ilara's sorrow. He told the men to handle it with care, to not damage the wood. He knew it was a vessel, a sacred container of a human tragedy. He had to be respectful of the pain it contained. As the carousel was reduced to a pile of wood and iron, the silence in the park became palpable. It was a quiet, born of finality, of a dream that had been shattered and was now being buried. Elias felt a profound sense of loss, a part of him dying with every piece of wood that was removed. But he also felt a sense of relief. He was not just destroying a machine, he was exorcising a demon, a grief that had infected his town and his life. The last piece to be removed was the central pole, the solid, unyielding core that had held the entire structure together. It was made of the same dark mahogany as the horses, its surface smooth and unblemished. It was the heart of the carousel. As it was being lowered, a small, intricate carving near the top of the pole, almost invisible to the naked eye, caught Elias's attention. He had not seen it before. It was a carving of a small, hand-carved rocking horse. He felt a profound chill. It was the last thing he had expected. The carousel pole had been carved from a different piece of wood, a different tree. It was the only piece of the carousel that had been made of this particular mahogany, a last cruel joke of fate. The sorrow wasn't just in the horses. It was in the very heart of the machine. The little rocking horse, a symbol of a child's toy, was a personal and direct message from Ilara's sorrow. Her pain was not just in the horses, it was in the very core of his creation. He knew he couldn't stop. He had to destroy the pole. But as he looked at the small, beautiful carving, he felt a new wave of responsibility. This was the last piece of the puzzle, the final and most personal symbol of her grief. He had to find a way to give it a proper burial. He had to honor the pain he was about to put to rest. He had to give Ilara's child and husband, the ghosts in the wood, a final resting place. He knew what he had to do. He had to go back to the asylum, the place where the sorrow had been born, and he had to bury the last piece of the carousel, the heart of the tragedy, and give the dead a final peaceful rest. The dismantled carousel lay in pieces on the grounds of the pleasure gardens, a monument to a beautiful, failed dream. Elias Thorne, however, was focused on a single piece, the central pole with the small, intricately carved rocking horse. It was the heart of the tragedy, the final and most personal piece of the puzzle. He knew he couldn't simply destroy it. He had to perform a symbolic act, a final burial that would put the ghosts of Ilara's family to rest and hopefully sever the connection between her grief and the wood. Under the cloak of night, with a small shovel and the central pole on his shoulder, Elias walked to the Oakhaven Asylum. The journey was even more ominous in the darkness, the broken buildings looking like spectral figures against the bruised sky. He made his way to the small stand of felled mahogany trees, the place where Ilara's sorrow had first been absorbed by the earth. He found a soft patch of ground near one of the stumps and began to dig. The earth was cold and damp. a physical reminder of the profound sadness that had seeped into this land. As he worked, he thought about Ilara, the woman who had lost everything, whose grief had become a physical force. He thought about his great-uncle, Dr. Thorne, a man of science who had been undone by a human emotion so powerful it had defied all logic. And he thought about his own part in this tragic tale, the architect who had unknowingly built a monument to a forgotten misery. He dug for a long time, the hole growing deeper with every shovel full of dirt. He stopped, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and looked at the pole, the small rocking horse seeming to gleam in the pale moonlight. He knelt and ran his hand over the carving, feeling the smooth, cold wood. He thought of Ilara's husband, a master woodworker, who had carved a simple toy for his child. He thought of the love and pride that had gone into that carving, a beautiful human moment that had been twisted by a devastating tragedy. He placed the pole in the hole, the carved rocking horse facing the sky, a final poignant act of defiance against the sorrow that had consumed it. He then took the shovel and began to fill the hole, burying the last piece of the carousel, the last piece of Ilara's grief. He was not just burying wood. He was burying a story, a family's tragedy, and a terrible secret that had haunted a town for 20 years. As he worked, a low hum began to emanate from the ground, the same sound he had heard from the mahogany horse, but it was different now. It was softer, less mournful, like a dying echo. The sound faded slowly, a final sigh of a sorrow that was finally being put to rest. When he was done, he stood over the newly turned earth, a sense of profound exhaustion and relief washing over him. The connection was broken. The sorrow was contained. He had done it. He had faced the impossible and had found a rational, albeit painful, solution. He had used the principles of his own profession, dismantling, deconstruction, and burial, to deal with a phenomenon that defied all logic. He then made one final pilgrimage. He walked back to the front of the asylum, where the old rusted gate stood ajar. He found a piece of charcoal on the ground, a remnant of the fire that had consumed this place. He then walked back to the place where he had found the logbook, the room where his great-uncle had made his last stand. He carefully drew a large protective circle on the floor, a symbol of containment, a final gesture of respect and closure for the man who had tried to warn the world. He left the asylum behind, the heavy weight of the past lifted from his shoulders. He was still Elias Thorne, the architect, the man of reason. But he was also a man who had faced the inexplicable and had come out the other side. He had found a human explanation for an unholy sound, and in doing so, he had saved his town from a silent, spreading sorrow. The town, in its ignorance, would forget the strange incident of the carousel. They would see it as a simple mechanical failure, a footnote in the history of their grand new park. But Elias would never forget. He would always remember the sound of a woman's grief, the weight of the mahogany wood, and the chilling truth that some emotions were so powerful they could be etched into the very fabric of the world. He was a guardian of a secret, a man who knew the true cost of a beautiful creation. He walked home, the first rays of dawn painting the sky in a gentle wash of pink and orange, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a profound sense of peace. The park would be rebuilt. The carousel, a new one, would be built, but it would be built with wood from a new place, a place with no sorrow, and he would never forget the lesson he had learned. 1 year later, the Blackwood Falls Pleasure Gardens was a place of unbridled joy. A new carousel stood in the center of the park, its horses painted in a dazzling array of colors, its calliope playing a cheerful, vibrant melody. The town, having long forgotten the brief, terrifying incident of the first carousel, embraced the new one with a joyous enthusiasm that was palpable. Children laughed and adults smiled, their faces filled with a simple, uncomplicated happiness. Elias Thorne watched the scene from a distance, a small knowing smile on his face. He had overseen the new carousel's construction himself. Every piece of wood meticulously chosen, every gear a perfect, unyielding piece of iron. It was a new creation, one built on a foundation of truth and a profound understanding of human emotions. The new carousel was a testament to his craftsmanship, but it was also a memorial to a sorrow he had put to rest. He walked toward the carousel, its music a bright, clear note in the autumn air. The operator, Silas, was a picture of a man transformed. His mustache was neatly trimmed, and his eyes, once wide with panic, now held a bright and cheerful twinkle. "A perfect machine, Mr. Thorne," Silas said, his voice full of pride. "Not a single problem. The music is a perfect delight." "I made sure of it, Silas," Elias replied, a hint of something deeper in his tone. He knew the true perfection of the machine was not in its flawless gears, but in its lack of a haunting. He then went to his office, the same office where he had pored over the ledgers, the place where his journey had begun. He opened a small locked drawer and pulled out 2 items, his great-uncle's journal and a small worn wooden box. The box had been found among Ilara's belongings at the sanitarium after her death, a few months after her encounter with Elias. The authorities had sent it to him, knowing he was the last person to have had contact with her. Inside the box were the pieces of the small, broken rocking horse that her husband had carved, the one that had been the source of all her pain. Elias had carefully glued them back together, a painstaking process of reconstruction. It was a simple act, but it was a deeply symbolic one. He had reassembled the shattered pieces of a family's grief, a small final act of kindness for a woman who had given her sorrow to the world. He held the repaired rocking horse in his hands, its smooth, polished surface a testament to a love that had been tragically cut short. He knew the sorrow was no longer in the wood. It was in the past. It was a closed chapter in a dark book. He placed the rocking horse back in the box and put it in his safe, a memorial to a family he had never known, a secret he would carry for the rest of his life. The park flourished. Elias Thorne, the man of reason, was hailed as a genius, a man who had overcome a difficult challenge and had built a perfect monument of joy. The townsfolk, in their ignorance, would continue to believe in the official story. They would never know about the Wailing Wood, the forgotten asylum, or the woman whose profound grief had almost brought a town to its knees. Elias, in the quiet moments of his life, would sometimes feel a faint, distant chill, a ghost of the profound sorrow he had once faced. It was a reminder of the fragility of the human soul, the power of emotion, and the profound, terrifying truth that some human experiences could be so powerful that they could bend the very fabric of reality. He would look at the new carousel, its vibrant colors and happy music, and he would know that the greatest joy was often born from the deepest, most profound sorrow. He had learned a powerful lesson. The world was not just a place of blueprints and logic. It was a place of secrets of human suffering and of a profound and mysterious interconnectedness. He was not just an architect. He was a guardian, a keeper of a terrible, beautiful truth. And he knew, with a certainty that was both chilling and comforting, that he would never be the same again. His carousel was perfect, but the world was still full of sorrow, and he was now a man who knew how to listen. And that was a journey he was willing to take, one step at a time, into a new and still terrifying future.